So I had the privilege of sitting down with Katie Gatti Tassin, better known as Money with Katie, to hear her take on all things personal finance, starting from very little, if any, knowledge on the topic, to how she stepped so gracefully into being the voice of reason for so many people when it comes to the messy world of money. We're aligned in so many ways. How low-key people should be investing, how acknowledging what's coming in and what's going out every month is both the scariest and the most rewarding thing that you can do for yourself, and how the smallest tweaks to your money can make a radical difference in what you're growing. She was a pleasure to spend some quality time with, and I really hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Who the f*** am I to tell you what to do with your money? My name is Priya currently managing millions of hardworking dollars. Enough foreplay. Let's talk money. Welcome to the F word. Smart money, no bull. Hey guys, it's Priya. Welcome back to the F word, the show where ambitious 30-somethings get their financial shit together so they can live well now and build wealth for later. Today's guest needs absolutely no introduction, but I'm going to give her one anyway. Katie Gatti Tassin, better known as Money with Katie, is the best-selling author of Rich Girl Nation, taking charge of our financial futures. She's also the host of the top-rated business podcast, The Money with Katie Show, with more than 11 million downloads. She also co-hosts the politics and culture podcast, Diabolical Lies. Badass. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I loved that introduction. I feel like Taylor Swift going on new heights.
Whoa, I love it. So Katie, I obviously know that a lot of people listening definitely know who you are, but for those that don't, I have a couple icebreakers that I was hoping you would play along with. How are you feeling?
Let's do it.
Okay, this is going to throw you a little bit. At Stashwell, we have a dinner party question that we like to ask people we're meeting for the first time. We actually even use it on interviews. You may have heard of this one. It's the communion question. So in the Christian church, the cracker represents the body of Jesus. The red wine represents the blood. If there were a church of Katie, what would the communion be? Remember, you're seeking converts.
Oh my gosh. As a Catholic school kid, this question resonates. The bite would be an almond croissant and the sip would be a double espresso.
Oh my God, that is so good. I'm converted. I'm joining. That's awesome.
Yes, come join my cult. My cult of financial responsibility.
Okay, next up. 5 to 9. What's your 5 to 9 after your 9 to 5? I know you're an entrepreneur, so you don't really have a 9 to 5, but maybe something you don't talk about very much. It's just for you, like something you do in your downtime.
Okay, so I actually listen to a lot of podcasts too. It's an art form that I love, both producing and listening. So I actually spend a lot of time outside of work listening to podcasts. Some of my favorites are snarky leftist comedy podcasts. So like If Books Could Kill, huge fan. I also watch a lot of television with my husband. That's like our favorite thing to do together. So we're like, oh, what are your hobbies? I'm like, I don't know, HBO. So we actually watch a lot of TV together. And I'd say like my 5 to 9 time is usually eating dinner, phones away, unless we're like on a podcast walk, computers away, and we are watching some show together.
I was going to say, are you Love Island people?
No, but
Okay.
Caroline made me watch an episode of Love Island for Diabolical Lies because we did an analysis of it, and I could not believe what I was watching. I felt like I was watching something that was AI generated. It was absolutely bizarre.
We live in a new world. Okay, final icebreaker question. When you get sad, what do you buy?
Oh, I think food, actually.
That's
Food
mine.
is my go-to if I'm down in the dumps, if I need a mood boost, if I'm trying to interrupt some negative pattern. I will usually be like, okay, down the street there's this restaurant called Postino. It's a chain in Denver. It might be elsewhere too, but they have like a grilled cheese and tomato soup meal,
My
and I
God.
get that with olive oil cake and like a side Caesar salad. And that's my like go-to comfort meal if I'm needing a little bit of warmth.
I love that. Mine is food too.
Do you have a
good
go-to?
stiff martini,
Nice.
some steak frite. That seems to do the trick. When I was going through my divorce, I probably ate my body weight in tacos and drank margaritas. It worked.
Do you have a go-to restaurant for your tacos? Are you like a diehard evangelist for any particular place?
So when it's in New York City after going out late night, I love San Loco. This
Try
thing
that.
called Taco Loco. And it's sort of like a crispy taco and a soft shell taco. It's after drinking out all night. It is like the perfect taco.
It's not fancy at all, but I absolutely love it.
I will
Add
hit
that
that
to your
place
list.
up. Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
they were
I've
actually
got a whole
even
food tour planned.
I don't know if you watch CBS Sunday Morning. I watch that some Sunday mornings.
Sometimes.
But they were just featured, and so now everyone's
Cool.
gonna know about them. It's the big thing. Okay, thank you so much for playing along, and let's get into it.
Yeah.
You may or may not remember this, but you and I almost crossed paths about 7 or 8 years ago. Funny enough, you actually talk about it in the beginning of your book, Rich Girl Nation. It turns out that we both have a bit of an emotional entanglement with money diaries.
We sure,
Can you tell
yes.
me about that time?
Yeah, let's see, this would have been fall 2018. I had been working full time for about a year. I was interested in money in the same way that I think most young professionals are interested in money, which is kind of out of a sense of self preservation and this vague ambient insecurity of not doing enough. And I had this friend at work named Kylie, lives in New York now, but we were both in Dallas at the time. And she had invited me to go to the Money Diaries book tour stop in Dallas. And I didn't typically do things on what I call school nights. I usually would just go home after work and decompress. This was a Tuesday night. And I decided to go, and I was really kind of blown away by this event because typically that sort of networking style, you're surrounded by people you don't know. I am extroverted, but I don't tend to actually enjoy things like that very much. And for whatever reason, that evening just felt very different. I felt very comfortable. I felt at ease. The programming was really cool. I was kind of amazed actually by the types of questions that were being asked in the Q&A, particularly because if you've ever gone to something like that before, you tend to expect that the Q&A portions can be kind of reserved and short and maybe awkward even. And people were just asking really, really intimate questions or questions that revealed intimate details about their financial lives. And I could not deny that I was just very interested and enthused. I didn't want the night to end, really.
Wow.
And that was a sign for me that this was actually a topic that I was more interested in than I had realized and that I wanted to keep talking about it. So it was a really pivotal part of the beginning of my financial journey and those early years of reading personal finance books or maybe listening to a rogue podcast or reading the odd blog post, but not really identifying with it as something that I could actually take part in producing. And so Lindsay Stanberry, the founding editor of Money Diaries at Refinery 29 and who was the author of the book, she was on stage that evening. And I just, always kind of kept tabs on what she was doing after that because she was one of the first women who was talking about money professionally that I, started to follow and enjoy her work. And so when my book came out this past summer, she was the panel co-host with me at my book launch event at 92nd Street Y, which was a very special full circle moment, kind of surreal.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, Lindsay and I go way back to her Refinery 29 days. And shameless plug, Stash Wealth's advice was actually featured in Money Diaries. And I actually even joined Lindsay on the Chicago leg of her book
So
tour.
cool.
Yeah, such a moment in time. I feel like that book really changed the game for so many people. And now you're doing the same.
No, I agree. I think that was just such an interesting and fresh take on how we talk about money and this very kind of dishy, behind the scenes, intimate view of how people are spending in their real lives and what they're earning. There was nothing else like it that I had ever been exposed to before. And I just remember being like, whoa, I feel this visceral attraction to this subject that I hadn't realized was there.
She made it so much more accessible and relatable. Truly brilliant. Well, you've been producing a shit ton of digital content in the personal finance space since 2018. I mean, really impressive. Why did you feel like Rich Girl Nation needed to exist as a book now offline?
That's a great question. I have always thought of myself first and foremost as a writer. And so writing a book was always on my list of things that I would want to do. When the opportunity presented itself to me and I was approached by the editor who ended up buying the book from me, it was automatic. One of those things where I am going to emotionally, I've already decided I'm going to do this. Now I need to invent the reasons and the logic and the rationale on the back end to make this make sense. But I think that was one of those things where the instinct at the time was like, obviously, I'm going to do this. And as the project progressed, because it takes a very long time to write a book, into the traditional publishing schedule, we started working on the proposal in fall 2022. We didn't sell that proposal and have a final concept until June, July 2023. Spent the next 18 months writing and editing it. And then it didn't come out until June 2025. So it's a really long process. And in that time, as I was evolving and changing and my perspectives were shifting and my interests were shifting, it kind of transitioned into, I feel like I have made my perspective on personal finance known. And as you know, the best practices kind of are what they are. There aren't many ways to reinvent the wheel after you've got the basics and then the intermediate and then the advanced stuff down. It is what it is. And I felt like I had really said my piece over the years through hundreds of blog posts and hundreds of podcast episodes. And so I started to think about the book as, this is my manifesto on money. If you want to know everything that I would tell you, if we were close friends trapped in a room together for a week and we were going to teach you everything that you needed to know about personal finance, this is what I would give you. This is what we would cover. And I wanted that to exist out in the world as something that will kind of live on even as I transition away from just producing personal finance related tactical, practical advice. And that felt like a very fitting, I don't want to say bookend because Money with Katie isn't ending, but it did feel like it gave me a little bit more permission to expand the type of work I'm doing on a weekly basis beyond the realm of, and here's how we strategize your taxes in retirement. Here's how we optimize your capital gains tax bracket, whether you're single or married, right? I wanted that to be accessible to people, whether at their local library or if they want to buy a copy and own it forever. I wanted that to be there, but I also wanted the freedom to be able to move on. So I think that it has served a little bit of a dual purpose for me in that way.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, personal finance is not that hard. And once you figure out what you need to be doing, you want to put it on autopilot and then go live your life. We always say smart money management does not require micromanagement. It's just like figure it out, get it automated, and then move on with your life. So do you think you're kind of a one and done, or are you kind of hooked on the authoring?
Well, I would definitely love to write another book, but I don't think it will be another how-to/self-help book. That was the genre that I fell into, was business, self-help, how-to. And like I said, it was a book that I think I really needed to write to kind of put the final bow on the chapter of my tactical personal finance advice life on the internet. But I would really love to write a book of essays or something that, the way that I kind of conceptualize it and have been describing it as, I feel like Rich Girl Nation was trying to give a lot of answers, and I am now more personally interested as a creator in work that asks more interesting questions and gets people thinking differently about things. And so that, I think, is what's going to come next, but we'll see. I'm going to spend the next 18 to 24 months really figuring that out, I think.
That's awesome. One of the things that I really appreciate about your content and now your book is that it doesn't just explain what to do with money, but it really gets into how we think about it. It sounds like that's a continued area of interest. Okay. This one's a bit of a spicier question, but I'm hoping you'll take it in the right spirit because I am very, very curious, and I'm definitely not as well researched on this as you are. So I'm looking to learn. But I was having a conversation earlier this week about how sometimes we hold ourselves in the roles that society assigns us, even when we know better. And I'm specifically talking about, I guess, the tension between being a victim of systemic inequality, which is very real, and unintentionally keeping ourselves stuck inside that system. So, like, where's the line? At what point does awareness turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Yeah, this is something that I have grappled with a lot over the years. I was talking to Paco de Leon about this because their work is so amazing too. And she was basically expressing this feeling of, sometimes I feel as though I have called attention to these systemic issues. And then I almost will see downstream of that conversations in my comments section or emails that I will receive, or just the general zeitgeist of people maintaining this attitude of hopelessness. Like, well, it's not worth even trying because everything sucks and everything is hopeless. And she was just expressing that she felt some responsibility for that outcome, and the fact that she started to wonder, did I do somebody a disservice? Have I done a disservice to this community by calling their attention to these systemic problems and making them aware of them? And I certainly agree that it is a balance from the standpoint of remembering your autonomy and remembering your maneuverability within a system. I guess the way that I think about it is that American culture writ large is exceedingly bootstrappy, exceedingly individualist. I think it is baked into the fabric of this country, this idea of the American dream, that anybody can succeed with enough hard work and enough ingenuity. And I think that the data around social mobility pretty much dispels that and like more or less puts that myth to bed, that this is actually not a very hospitable country for social mobility, and that the class that you are born into actually does have quite a big impact on where you will end up in life. And that's not to say that you cannot break out of a bad situation, but that it is very hard and there are a lot of systemic factors that are going to influence that.
Mm.
I think all of that being said, I tend to think about and conceive of the economy and our role in it in the sort of two-class dimension. This is something that I wrote about a couple weeks ago. How there is a portion of the population for whom no amount of personal finance advice is really going to be useful to them. I would say that this is probably between 25% and 50% of the country, the bottom half, we'll say. Their net worth is effectively zero. The average American, not the average American because that gets skewed up, but like the median American owns nothing. So most Americans are trapped trading their time for money. And in the absence of additional education, upskilling, etc., they're probably going to stay in that position, and cutting back on, the type of fruit they're buying at the grocery store is not going to change that. And I think that it is important that we look at that realistically and honestly, because the solution for that portion of the population is policy. There's just no way around it. But there's also a portion of the population, which is the one that I was in, as like an educated, upwardly mobile person who at the time was, young and earning below median wages, had potential, was able-bodied, didn't have kids, lived with a roommate, who with hard work, with cutting back on spending, with knowledge, with information, was able to really change her situation. That, to me, is the portion of the population that actually can, through their labor and through their surplus value at the individual level, they have enough margin, if they care to create it, if they can detach themselves from the consumerist hamster wheel, they can buy their freedom by buying cash flowing assets, whether that's real estate, whether that's stocks, what have you. And that is the part where your individual autonomy and your personal responsibility has to play a role. And if you're not willing to do that, that is kind of on you. And so I do think about it in that way, that there's always kind of that binary that I'm thinking about when I'm making content, when I'm talking about systemic issues. It's not that the systemic issues don't affect the people in the latter group, but they're not insurmountable for that group. And it's something that I don't feel I have 100% landed the plane on personally. I don't know 100% where I come down on it, because I think that life in America is much harder than it would need to be. And I desperately want to see that improve. And I don't feel like the culture needs more bootstrap, individualist, rah-rah advice. I think we've had a lot of that. I think what we need is more people to recognize the collective power that we hold, and actually that together we are not helpless. And that these things that we think of as unsolvable or intractable, there are countries all over the world that have already solved these problems. And that it is actually the insistence that we keep approaching them at the individual level that is keeping us stuck. And we have to start thinking differently about collective power and how we wield it. And so I think that awareness is the first step in getting people to become more politically active, and not politically active in the electoral sense. I'm not saying, remember to vote every 4 years. That's not what I mean. I mean, at the local level, getting involved in your community. I mean, organizing your workplace. I mean, actually recognizing that together we do wield a lot of power, and that by withholding labor, by withholding spending, by withholding purchases, it's we the people that control this economy. I think that it only serves those who already hold all of the wealth and power in society if we remain atomized and fragmented. And so I try to deliver personal and individual advice through a lens that acknowledges that gap and says, hey, this is the beginning of your work. This is not the end of your work. You do need to get yourself afloat, but that's not the end. Like, we actually do have a lot of work to do, and we can only do it together.
Can push for further change. Wow. So powerful,
Thank
so
you.
beautifully said,
you.
so empathetically handled because so many of us feel stuck and it's up to the people that we're speaking to. It's up to us to get unstuck and control what we can control. I know that's a cliche,
Yeah.
but you talk about it that you don't need to make six figures to even build real wealth. I'm not saying we shouldn't keep pushing for change, but you don't want to lose sight of doing what we can do within the system.
Yeah, yeah. And I think helplessness and apathy and nihilism, these are all very tempting emotions because there is a sort of complacency that they permit of, well, if it's hopeless, I don't have to do anything. And that doesn't serve anybody, least of all, not you. And I think that when I think about it in the international sense, which is something that I feel very fortunate that my job permits me to learn enough and spend my time, reading the books that have given me more of an international or global perspective after having just, grown up in America, not known any different, didn't even leave this country and stepped foot on another continent until my mid 20s. But I think those of us in what is sometimes referred to as like the imperial core, like you live in the West, you live in the United States, we of all people do not really have a leg to stand on of claiming helplessness and hopelessness. We really have benefited tremendously from the global order over the last 100 years. So we kind of have to be at the forefront of improving things. And I think about that a lot too, that in the context of the United States, yes, there's a lot of wealth inequality, but when you look globally, we still retain so much wealth in this country. I think about that a lot. And I think that has started to inform my work even more, that like, no, we actually have no time and like we can't afford to be hopeless and helpless. We actually have to be at the forefront of this change.
That is such a great reminder. Just that
Thank you.
historical context. Okay. I could keep going down this rabbit hole with you forever. So I want to dig into some of the themes that come up again and again, not just in your work, but in the conversations I think we're both having with our respective communities. So just to dive into a couple of questions. First up, a lot of people in their 20s, I guess, still think financial planning is something you figure out later. But can you speak a little bit to the role that having a plan has played in your life and maybe how it's shifted your approach to your money?
For sure. For sure. I think the best example of this comes from when I finally sat down to make a plan for the first time. Because at that point, this was again 2018-ish timeframe to give you a sense for, we weren't in the inflationary spike yet. The cost of living hadn't really exploded in the way that it had now, but I was a below median earner at the time. I think I earned probably $53,000 a year when I was sitting down to do this. And I lived in Dallas, Texas, which is a medium cost of living city. It's not cheap, but it's also not New York or San Francisco. And I didn't have any sort of semblance of a plan. I had concepts of a plan from the standpoint of money was coming in and money was going out. And I generally knew, the high level numbers. But the Discover statement at the end of the month always surprised me. I was always like, something has gone awry. I have been defrauded. Let me go through and check every single purchase. Oh, no, wait, that was all me. So that was like a common fixture in my financial life at the time. But I didn't think I earned enough to save or invest with any regularity or consistency. And so when I sat down to make a plan, I figured what I was going to find was a confirmation of that assumption. But what actually happened was I listed out all my fixed expenses that I knew about, particularly the big things that we know we have to plan for, the rent, the car insurance, those recurring expenses that come to mind pretty easily. And what I found was that even after adding things like, my typical grocery budget based on how much I know I spend on groceries, and, I know I go out twice a week and this is typically what it costs, even after adding that stuff in, I still had something like $1,000 unaccounted for. And I was so surprised by that I actually redid the math. I was like, certainly I have missed something, but no, there was an extra $1,000 that was just not accounted for. And that really made me look twice at things and go, okay, I actually maybe can afford to be investing. Let me give this a shot. And so I started with the automatic transfers into the Roth IRA, into the high yield savings account at the time, because I was still really building up an emergency fund. And then later with a small transfer every month after each payday to a taxable brokerage account. And putting that one change in place, my net worth grew rapidly. And that was really surprising to me. So it wasn't that I started earning more money or even really consciously was spending differently, but because the money was just leaving my account before I had the chance to notice it sitting and checking and to spend it on something, I was making really quick progress. And honestly, that experience was a big part of the reason why I wanted to start blogging about money, because I saw how, like you said, some of this stuff is easy. And I know that that sounds really, again, in the world that we live in, especially in 2025, it sounds a little out of touch to be like, oh, this is easy. But I was at the time surprised by the ease with which just making a couple what felt like small tweaks in about an hour of setting up automatic transfers just radically changed my financial position. And I wanted to share that information with other people because it just felt like a knowledge gap.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And when we talk about it being easy, I think one of the things I'm always thinking about is going up against Wall Street and traditional advisors who like to make it feel so hard and so complicated. And we almost just buy into that and then think we can't do it, so we don't. But I love the story that you shared because it is inevitably the experience that we have with everyone, right? We're dealing with a high earning population that's essentially making six figures, but living paycheck to paycheck. And every single time the same thing happens. I'll never have any money left over. There's nothing extra. And you sit down and you go through the numbers the first time and it's like, whoa, I actually have this much extra. And it's so empowering to be like, yeah, what do you want to do with it?
Yeah. What I have found consistently and what has been very surprising to me as somebody that thinks about this stuff all day long and has what I would classify as a very advanced grasp on these topics is that even now, when I sit down at the end of the year and I annualize everything and I look at how did we spend in all these categories? What were our contributions? What was our total income? What did we pay in taxes? Every single time I am surprised by something to the extent that we end up taking an insight from it and making a tweak, making a change. And I think it's just so difficult. At least my brain doesn't work this way. It's very hard to intuit numbers from those day-to-day interactions, those day-to-day transactions. And so I still am a big believer in the power of tracking. I don't think that it has to be micromanagey, to your point, but I still get so much insight and derive a lot of value from doing that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you're speaking to the awareness piece, which is what originally Money Diaries was all about, is like, take a look at what you're spending. That's amazing. So when you do that, when you become aware of where your money is going and you do inevitably find out that you're going to have money left over, investing sort of as you get into your, I guess, maybe late 20s, early 30s, you kind of feel like you should be doing this. Yet it still scares a lot of people our age. They see it as risky or confusing or something like finance bros do. How do you talk to people? Like, how do you talk people through that fear and help them reframe what investing is actually for?
It's a really good question. And it's something that I coincidentally was just reviewing and editing a blog post about this yesterday because we're in the process of revamping our website. And in doing so, we're migrating hundreds of old posts over. And something that I had written years ago that I'd completely forgotten about was essentially talking about how saving and investing feel different. Emotionally, the experience is very different. And when I first made that switch from, okay, I'm not just hoarding, I'm not just stockpiling in a metaphoric pile of cash in my Chase savings account. Now I'm actually buying assets with this money in the hopes that those assets will go make more money for me. I remember being really nervous and feeling quite exposed and quite vulnerable. And the first thing I ever did was I essentially mentally had to get myself to the point of, I had a Robinhood account at the time, not what I would recommend using now, but I didn't know any better. So I thought, okay, I have this emergency fund saved. I think at the time it was like $20 or maybe. That was the extent of my assets. My net worth was in that savings account. And I knew it was time to start investing. I learned enough to know that it was time. And so I thought, all right, if I were going to Vegas, like what amount of money would I feel comfortable losing if this goes to zero, right? And I somehow talked myself into $1,500. I don't really even remember why that was the amount, but it was like, that was the upper limit for what I was comfortable risking. So I transferred it over to Robinhood. I bought a couple ETFs, just standard Vanguard, S&P 500. I think there was like maybe a tech ETF in there. And then I just would stare at the screen. I would watch it bob up and down, red and green, like minute to minute. And it was kind of this little, I'm going to dip my toe in and just like see how this feels. And once I noticed that, like, oh, it's not going away, it's still there. Maybe it's down $10, but over time, as I saw that money actually gaining value or more or less staying the same, it made me feel a little bit more comfortable with, okay, this actually doesn't seem as risky as I thought it was at first. Sometimes what I'll tell people is, hey, if you just have like an emotional hang up, like you've already done the research, you understand that you are buying a little piece of companies that are producing real value, that are making real profits, that are being returned to you. If you've already seen all the data about how you have a 98% chance of making money in the S&P 500 over a decade, and you know you don't need this money for decades, but for whatever reason, there's still that hang up. You just need to put a little bit of money on the line that you would be comfortable going to zero and just get a little bit of skin in the game so you can get comfortable. It's like exposure therapy. And that's what I needed to get started. And then over the years, as I watched my net worth grow in some of these investment accounts, fortunately, right, like I was investing during a bull market until March 2020, and then that quickly rebounded as well. But once I got some skin in the game and saw my net worth growing, then the fear actually flipped, where if I had too much money in savings or too much money in cash, I would start to be like, oh gosh, I need to get that money to work. I need to put that money in the market because I want it to start growing. I don't want it to just be languishing in my savings account. So I do think that 90% of it is a mental flip that has to be turned on.
It's tough because, again, to the detriment of the typical investor, the messages we've been receiving and absorbing have been that gambling and investing are the same thing. And they're not. And with investing, right, like often we'll tell people, you can't learn to swim by dipping your toe in the water. You actually have to get in. But I hear you. You want to move away from that idea that it's money you can lose. That's when you go to Vegas. Yes, that's money you can lose. And you don't want to do that with your hard-earned money. But I hear you on the exposure therapy, like just like getting in there and realizing, oh, this isn't gambling. This is diversified long-term.
Right. Because I was worried that it felt like gambling. I think because particularly in this instance, the Robinhood interface definitely engenders that feeling in you that you're gambling and
built for engagement. Built for you to log in.
Right. And it was only through being like, well, what's the worst case scenario? Well, the worst case scenario is it goes to zero. Okay, well, what amount would I be fine totally losing?
Sure.
Just to get myself over this hump. And then once I saw that not only am I not losing it, but it's growing, then it was like, okay, now I have physically internalized the idea that this is not gambling. Now this viscerally feels safer to me. And like I said, I had done the research to know that it was quote unquote safe. I mean, obviously, future returns are not guaranteed. Historical returns are not indicative of future returns, etc. But I still had that emotional difficulty part with the money that I was going to start investing. And I think what's been fascinating over the years is I talked to a lot of people and have gotten to meet a lot of people who are accountants or went to business school or studied finance. Like that was their major. They have a degree in finance who don't know anything about personal finance. And that was kind of eye-opening to me because as a communications major, I had this story in my head that had I just gone to school for this, I would be further ahead. I would know more. And that all these people who went through the business school or who became accountants or who studied, high finance, that like all of them knew how to manage their personal finances. And I just made the wrong choice. And that's why I was behind. And I talked to those people all the time, like, no, they don't teach you any of this stuff in school. We didn't get this either. Like everyone has to learn this on their own, unless you are literally studying to become a financial planner and you are studying the CFP course material, which again, you're not getting in college. That's a completely separate professional endeavor. You also are not learning these things. So that also gave me a little bit more confidence that like, wait, I'm not actually like out in the cold on this. Nobody knows.
You're not behind.
Everybody has to learn.
Totally. I appreciate that. It makes it so much less daunting to know that you're not alone, you're not behind, and everyone.
Yeah, and I'm a dumbass with the PR degree. So like if I can do it, so can you, frankly.
Totally. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. One of my favorite topics, relationships and money. Since this is something that you're so interested in, Was it important to you to find a partner who was good with money or willing to learn with you? And do you think that both people in a relationship need to be equally involved with the finance stuff?
So I met and started dating my husband around the same time that I became interested in money. By default, we ended up talking about it sometimes almost from the perspective of here's this hobby I am interested in, as opposed to we're talking about our own relationship to finance. So that was kind of an interesting dynamic that I think has ended up serving us well, because he was similarly interested in the financial independence, retire early movement, which is how I got my start. But I think if I were starting over now and my husband did not exist and I was looking for a partner, I don't think that I would necessarily need somebody who was equally proficient or was as interested. I think that I'm probably in the high 90s scale wise of like interest in personal finance as a topic. I don't think it would be reasonable for me to expect to, partner up with somebody who was at the same level interest wise. But I do think that as I reflected on that question and on the importance of, a partner, why does it matter to me beyond the practical? I think that there's an element of self-respect that comes in to at least knowing the basics, where if somebody respects themselves and respects their time and respects their own energy, you have to work for every dollar that you get in most cases. And so if you are spending 40 hours, 50 hours, 60 hours a week to earn this money and you have no interest in what happens to it, you have no interest in managing it, and you're just kind of floating through life, as a person looking for a romantic partner, that might signal to me that you're not really taking your own time and energy seriously. Like, you're not respecting yourself to the level that you should be. You deserve better than that. And so I think that is the sort of baseline that I would be looking for. Has an attempt been made? Is there an interest in managing this money as what it represents, which is your time, energy, your future freedom? Do you take those things seriously? And so I think that's the sort of attitude shift or the wavelength that I would be looking for someone to meet me on. Not like, oh, do you know the PE ratio of the S&P 500 index this week? So I think that's kind of philosophically what I would be most attracted to.
Yeah, you have your financial shit together and he was able to get his financial shit together. Like, the learning curve, you were on the same learning curve at the same time. But if you start dating someone and, you have your shit together and they don't, there might be a mismatch in, like you said, how they value, how they respect themselves, their time, their energy.
And I think that there's also the practical side of it too. I mean, to me, that's kind of the romantic chemistry side and what I look for in other people that I spend time with. But I think that there's just the practical piece of this, which is that money, unfortunately, is a really big determinant of the type of life that you will lead and the quality of life that you will get to have. And it will be very difficult, practically speaking, to build a life with somebody who views this topic completely differently than you do. And it's not that it will be impossible. I mean, I've interviewed certified financial therapists on my show before who work with couples all the time. It's not that it's an insurmountable problem, but both people have to want to get on the same page. And sometimes there are situations wherein one partner is not interested in changing. And much like with every other realm of a relationship, that's going to present problems. And in a capitalist economy where we trade our time and energy and labor for money, those problems are going to have really direct impacts on you and on your quality of life. And so I think that's why the fourth chapter of the book is all about marriage and partnering up with somebody, and how do you combine finances strategically, and what are the conversations that you need to be having with this person, and what sort of legal protections do you need to be putting in place for both of your benefit, and what are the long-term ramifications and risks that it just makes sense to be aware of before you sign your name on the dotted line, lifelong binding contract between you and this person and the government. It's just like the practical considerations that I would tell anybody signing a contract of that nature to take into consideration.
Well said. That was an amazing chapter. And
Thank you.
We are also big proponents of the hybrid approach to keep some autonomy. But at the end of the day, you don't want to be nickeling and diming each other and Venmoing each other for, I think you used half the toilet paper that it's just like, you said it as a team, right? You want to be on the same page. You're a team. And at the end of the day, what you spend your money on or how you spend your money tracks back to your values, and values aligning are a good indication of success in a relationship.
Right. And I mean, I think the biggest takeaway for me that feedback-wise, what I've heard that surprises people most about that chapter is that the separation of accounts in a marriage is mostly an illusion. And that even if you are keeping everything in different accounts that are titled separately and your name is on your stuff and their name is on their stuff, the eyes of the law, all of that belongs to both of you. So I always try to just remind people that there is certainly a strategic role for separate accounts to play, but sometimes they can serve as a little bit of a scapegoat or an exit ramp from even having the conversation. And then that is often when you find yourself unpleasantly surprised down the road when it's like, oh, I've been saving and investing so diligently, they haven't. And now we're splitting up and they are technically entitled to half of my retirement savings. That is worst case scenario. And I never want somebody to find themselves in that position.
Absolutely. I want to be respectful of your
time.
So
on the note of imperialism, I guess we'll wrap up there.
Let's wrap with something a little bit lighter.
Yeah, sure, of course.
So money can be heavy, right? So we'll close out with something we'll call a palate cleanser. We have a segment I always close the show with called Best Bite. I'm a foodie if you can't tell the number of food questions. So Katie, tell us, what's the best thing you've eaten recently? It doesn't have to be in Denver, just something unforgettable. Where do we need to go? What do we need to order? Food or drink?
Okay, there is a restaurant in Denver in the Highlands called Mead Street Provisions, and I think it was actually opened by someone from New York. I think they might be from Brooklyn. I don't know for sure, but best sandwiches in Denver. Every single thing I've eaten there has been incredible. The wings are incredible. The sweet potato fries are incredible. Like, you will not be disappointed. So if you come to Denver and you're looking for just like a solid, like casual dining option, go to Mead Street Provisions in the Highlands.
Come in. Mead Street Provisions. Great rack. Love it. Putting it on the list.
I'm going to go there now, actually. I'm probably going to go get a sandwich after we hang up.
Where can people find you, Katie, follow you, get your book?
Yeah. Okay. So Rich Girl Nation, wherever books are sold. Go support your local library. moneywithkatie.com. That's where I post my essays every week. The Money with Katie newsletter you can sign up for. Again, every Wednesday I'm sending out economic analysis, essays, things of that nature, personal finance tools, and the Money with Katie show. If you like podcasts, we have an interview usually every week, and we try to talk to really interesting people who are taking a unique approach in their work to money, culture, class, politics, the economy, etc.
Beautiful. Your podcast is incredible.
Thank you.
Goes without saying, but if you haven't already grabbed a copy of Rich Girl Nation, get on it. Katie, thank you so much for joining us. You're an absolute powerhouse. Your work is the reason that so many more people are talking about money.
Thank you.
And to everyone listening, if you love this episode, please send it to a friend who needs to hear it. That's how we grow the show and keep bringing on awesome guests like Katie. All right. See you next time. Thanks for listening to The F Word with Priya Malani. If you like what you heard, hit subscribe wherever you're listening and leave us a review while you're at it. We're approval junkies. Don't forget, you can find a ton of great resources, content, courses, and other freebies at stashwealth.com. Now, for the capital S stuff our lawyers want us to say. StashWealth is a registered investment advisor. Content presented is for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to make an offer or solicitation for any specific securities, product, service, or strategy. Consult with a qualified investment advisor, that's us, before implementing any strategy. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Past performance does not guarantee future results. There, we said it.
Did I have that on?